Okay, I'm going to start. My name is Matilda McQuaid, and I'm Acting Director of Curatorial here at the Cooper Hewitt, and I'd like to welcome you all to our first program in the series Behind the Design. This lunchtime discussion is really an opportunity for our curators, our conservators, educators, and other specialists to come together for conversations around our collection and exhibitions. And it will also be an opportunity for you, the audience, to really ask questions in the chat, which will be moderated today by Charlotte Gill. So thank you very much, Charlotte. And I want to just let you know about our next program, which will be April 13th at 12:30, called Take a Seat, a Mexican Chair and Its Journey to Cooper Hewitt. So we will, those who are attending will receive, we'll send you a link to that registration, but also check back on all the other events that, virtual program events that we have at Cooper Hewitt. So the series would not have been possible without staff member Phoebe Moore, who is definitely behind the scenes, but a really important presence. And she was responsible for all of the seemingly simple technical aspects of the presentation. And I'm also incredibly grateful to the curatorial team who you will have the honor to hear from over the course of the year. We have a year-long series planned. So I'd like to also thank, to extend my enormous gratitude also to Target, Gucci, the Kobe Foundation, and Keith Haring Foundation for making this event and the exhibition possible, which you will hear about in just a moment. So, and there will be a credit line in the presentation, and you can see all the sponsors. So believe it or not, we are celebrating Willi Smith Day today. Alexandra Cunningham, Cameron, and Darnell Jamal Lisby will introduce us to this historic day. Alexandra is curator of contemporary design and the Hintz secretarial scholar and the curator of the Willi Smith Street Couture exhibition, which is currently on view at Cooper Hewitt through mid-October. We have not reopened yet. We hope to in the very near future, but so please come back and check our page for when that reopening will be. Alexandra's been at the Cooper Hewitt for 2.5 years and was formerly editor-in-chief of independent arts journal, The Miami Rail, and she's also been creative director of the Design Miami Fairs. Darnell was the project curatorial assistant for the Willi Smith exhibition and is currently an education associate working on virtual programming among many other things. He has a master's in fashion and textiles, history, theory, museum practices from the Fashion Institute of Technology. So I welcome you both and thank you for launching the first one this afternoon. Darnell and Alexandra, take it away.
Thanks so much, Matilda, and thanks to everyone for joining. We couldn't think of a better way to celebrate Black History Month at the museum than by sharing the origins of Willi Smith Day and also talking about Willi Smith as an advocate for diverse lives and diverse lifestyles. As Matilda mentioned, Darnell and I worked on the Willi Smith project together with Julie Pastor, an incredible team from the museum, and also extremely importantly, Willi Smith's friends and family and contemporaries, all of whom have contributed uniquely to the behind the scenes details of making the exhibition, the book, and the community archive that you're going to hear about today. So we're excited to present a few projects that we think illustrate Willi Smith's activism. We'd love to hear your questions and comments, so feel free to drop them in the Q&A or make comments in the chat as we go along. If we can pick them up as we're speaking, we will, but otherwise we'll definitely address them at the end of the presentation. So thanks so much everyone for joining, and Darnell, let's jump in and take it away.
Absolutely. Thank y'all so much. As Alexandra said, I mean, this has been such a labor of love from everyone involved. And so we really do. We thank you so much. And from, as Matilda mentioned, here we want to thank again Target, Gucci, Kobe Foundation, Keith Haring Foundation, everyone who was involved in actually financing and helping us bring this into fruition. It's something that we are just so excited about, and for everyone to see. It's really kind of bittersweet because almost a year in a few weeks we opened one day and then we closed and shut down, and so we're hoping that very soon that you all will get to see the work that we put in to this exhibition. But with that said, let's get into more Willie Smith Day activities and understanding who he was and the impact that he has on the fashion industry as a whole. So many people, I'm sure Alexandra can attest to that, did not, understand the gravity of how much of the impact of Willie Smith's life and career, and not just within fashion design, but then all of the different artistic practices that he embarked on throughout his entire career. He was born in 1948 in Philadelphia, and we had a chance to speak to his family, his brother Norman, his aunt Doris. We were able to get a lot of firsthand accounts of the life that he lived long before he came to New York. He went to the Philadelphia Museum College of Art, and studied design. And we also were able to, which you can also read in, which we'll talk about the archive, but also in the book, we have a recollection of his best friend, Alvin Bell, who was his ace, who they both started in fashion together, and they moved to New York around the same time to start their careers in fashion. Alvin went a little more on the traditional, conventional, glamorous fashion route, or designing more or less evening wear and things of that nature, whereas Willie went more or less into the more sportswear and streetwear aspect. And that's really what we're going to get into, those nuances today. But many people deem him, his friends, his family, as the king of streetwear. And that was something that we were trying to understand, what is streetwear? Because today it's really kind of evolved into its own category of clothing. And obviously there are Paris houses that sell quote unquote streetwear category for like $2,000 a trouser, or $1,000 for a sweater or something like that. But that wasn't really its nascence. And also there's this association to streetwear to hip hop in the urban communities of which hip hop was adjacent to. And therefore, we have kind of negated the fact that there is this other path to contemporary streetwear, the path that Willie Smith really was a trailblazer on, and it really exudes from traditional American sportswear. Willie, when he moved to New York around 1965, he went to Parsons and parted ways with Parsons in 1967, and went right into working at various Seventh Avenue labels like Glenora and Talbot and Bobby Brooks. Bobby Brooks is actually where Arthur McGee was stewarded and was the creative director over. And afterwards, in 1969, Willie became the creative director for a newly formed Seventh Avenue label, Digits, where that was really the ground and foundation of what we would be able to see when he eventually developed his own brand, Willy Wear, with his business partner and friend, Lori Millay, in 1976. And Willie, through Willy Wear, he was able to really use that as a moment to show people all the different influences and inspiration that he was, that allowed him to touch people in the way that they wanted to be reached. He was inspired by what people wore every day on the streets, how they styled their ensembles, the ease, the functionality of it. He was inspired by traditional workwear that was very much akin specifically to the American history of workwear and workwear uniforms dating back to the mid-19th century, looking at denim and the history of denim and integrating that within his entire lexicon. He was inspired by Southeast Asian dress, even right before in South Asian dress. And right before he started Willy Wear, he made contact. Well, he was very much a arbiter of going to India quite a bit and traveling there and being inspired by the people. And he set up his manufacturing for Willy Wear in India. And therefore, when it comes to Southeast Asian dress, that was not only inspired him by way of the aesthetic, but his entire total process, his total experience that he was creating from production to presentation. Furthermore, he was inspired by the Afro diaspora, which we'll get into later on in this presentation as well. And he used Willy Wear as a breeding ground to really kind of fuse all of these different cultural exchanges to give people what they wanted and what they felt in this really time of liberation and freedom of the 1970s into the 1980s. Oh, and here we have a photo. I don't want to move on just yet, but this is a photo of actually Willie doing a campaign for his digits, for a digits collection. And to the right of him is his sister Tuki, who was his muse. And you'll see Tuki show up in this presentation quite a bit, but she was really she was really the initial source of inspiration for Willie's career in aesthetic, even beyond Willy Wear, even before Willy Wear, and the joy and the sass and the attitude, everything behind it was something that Willie wanted to invoke within his brand and his collections and pass that on in a more abstract way through the clothing. And this next video is, which I'll show you in a second, is actually a clip of the spring 1985 Sightseeing presentation that Willie did in his showroom. You'll see different inspirations, as I said, the Afro diaspora, dress related all over, particularly from West Africa. You'll see inspiration of Ivy style, athleisure and athletic wear. You'll see business and traditional office dress, and you'll see all of these things come together. And honestly, when you talk about contemporary fashion, a lot of these elements we kind of take advantage of it, but during this time, this was very avant-garde to mix all of these different things together to present it in the way that he did.
Willi Smith kicks off spring with an all-stops-out presentation for Willy Wear. This year, he takes us on a sightseeing tour. Using a wild array of backdrops and props, first stop, Jamaica, a languid setting for his casual sugarcane creations. Next, Metropolis with slick city suits. Then, on to LA for wild, gaudy prints. The country club scene is set with plaids in a garden of fresh colors, and the look just wouldn't be complete without white golfing shoes. Teeing off some of spring's best looks are his color and pattern matches, like grass green and pink. They're very good looking. And Willie's signature t-shirt dresses down the new short skirt suit. Last, it's a Punch and Judy puppet show in clownish light layers of white, including the ever-present duster coat. Willi Smith for Willy Wear, in fine form for spring '85 with young American looks.
What's really amazing about that also, you see some familiar faces like Alva Chin and Iman, Black models who were really the leading faces of fashion during this time. And I think that's really kind of like an underrated story that we need to celebrate a lot more, of the way Black bodies really kind of gave life to clothing across the board, even beyond Willie's brand, but in fashion in general. Of course, you had the Battle of Versailles event that happened in 1973, which was a standout moment, but certainly Willie continued to capitalize off of that and build his brand around that aspect. And another quick point, Willie was not just a fashion designer, he was an artist. His artist collaborations are what really gave him that allowed him to ascend into the place that he was to ascend to. He collaborated with the site architects to create the showrooms, to design the showrooms and the retail spaces that he worked out of and that he sold clothes out of. And he worked with Christo and Jean-Claude to create the workwear uniforms for several projects, including Surrounded Islands, Miami, as well as the Pont Neuf Wrapped project. He worked with a myriad of the leading artists like Robert Rauschenberg, Keith Haring, Gilbert and George, so many of them, Barbara Kruger, to produce artist t-shirts, which he premiered at Art Venture in 1984, which was this kind of fun, total experience that he wanted to use to obviously extend the Willy Wear brand, but then also to kind of break down in this abstract way how clothes are supposed to be bought and sold instead of a 3D, but in more of a 2D aspect. So this was really kind of all a part of his brand, but he thought about these ways and using these avant-garde mediums from digital media, which we'll get into in a little bit, in various visual arts to elicit the joy in his brand and the connectivity in his brand.
Yeah, so much of what Willie Smith was trying to do also with Laurie in relationship to the collaborations with artists and performers, architects and designers was really about trying to bring art into everyday life. And you can see that, really clearly in the Christo and Jean-Claude collaborations, but also so much in the t-shirts. And I love, Darnell, how you started by mentioning Alvin, because I remember so clearly when we first started talking to Alvin, and he mentioned that even as a teenager, Willie Smith was talking about how he wanted to be a people's designer, how Alvin was looking at couture houses as inspiration and was interested in creating these finely wrought forms and, designing more of a luxury driven fantasy idea of fashion. Whereas Willie Smith very early on was really thinking about how his designs could make a difference in the lives of people every day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And maybe just a little bit more about that, really when we began researching Willie Smith, we only had two primary streams of information. We had press clippings that really waned after his death in 1987 and pretty much stopped after Willy Wear went bankrupt in 1990. And, connecting back to Alvin, a really extensive network of his friends and collaborators who spent a lot of time with us, mining their memories to help illustrate Willie Smith as a person, but also Willie Smith as a designer. We began collaborating really early on with our colleagues at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, Elaine Nichols and Kelly Navies really encouraged us early on to emphasize Willie Smith's biography, but to also organize oral histories, which they also produced for us and have included in the archive. Bill T. Jones, Beth Ann Hardison, and Willie Smith's partner, Laurie Mallet, were all interviewed and have been essential to helping us really understand where Willie Smith was coming from and what he was trying to accomplish with the brand. But I mean, those incredible contributors were really just a small part of the deluge of stories that kept coming as we were introduced to more and more people. Kim Hastreiter, the founder of Paper Magazine, model Pat Cleveland, costume designer Ruth Carter, who collaborated with Willie Smith on Spike Lee's School Days. It was her first project as a costume designer. And each of these conversations, we're not just sort of working to compound, curatorial research. They unfolded completely new ways of understanding Willie Smith, and they became eventually our main focus. Not just adding detail and vibrancy to the collection reviews and period interviews, but they shaped eventually the idea of the exhibition, which emphasized Willi Smith's collaborations with artists, but also his broader social impact as a designer, and the ethic of his brand. So you see a snapshot of the exhibition on the right here, which is a constellation of garments, graphic design, video, and ephemera. Once you're all able to come and see the exhibition, you'll see a lot more of that, but we tried to construct these snapshots of all of the different creative influences that were involved in each of the collections and the collaborations. And on the left, you see the cover of the book, which is designed by Polymode, which is sort of the first representation of how we began to imagine that distilling the details from all of the stories that we were receiving into one new narrative about Willi Smith did not at all feel like an authentic reflection of the celebration of difference that he loved. And so, we moved forward with these platforms for decentralized methods of sharing his history. So the book, it publishes remembrances alongside new scholarship and perspectives from artists and historians, theorists, Dario Calmese, Brendan Fernandez, Jonathan Michael Square. We saw Camille and Brewer is here in the talk, also a contributor. 50 contributors in total came together to collage a portrait of Willi Smith and his legacy. Next, thanks so much. And of course, the Willi Smith Digital Community Archive, which launched on March 13th, the day of the show, and also the day that all museums closed in New York due to COVID-19 precautions. But it collects recollections, images of clothing, ephemera, drawings, and personal snapshots that really build on an understanding of how Willi Smith worked and lived, who and what he loved. It's a place to fill in the blanks, to say what hasn't been said, to sketch out a more complete timeline of his life. And of course, we published the essays and the interviews from the books there, so they're free and available. Myra Edmonds, who's an incredible member of our team, has been translating and transcribing contributions from former Willy Wear staff, icons like Shyla Edmonds, Carmen de Lavalade. She's processing new images of garments and objects that have come through social media links, the museum's info line, word of mouth. It's really incredible. Every time there's a story published somewhere, it leads to some more information that is put onto the archive. And it's not just been a repository. I think it's also generated new research and contributed to the depth of understanding of Willi Smith as a complex persona. In some cases, things that we thought we knew were contradicted by another story. You see two people remembering the same event differently. And although publishing this type of discrepancy has been something that's unusual for most museums, we felt that it honestly presents a more accurate picture of how histories are formed.
I agree. And it's like, even to that point, you mentioned all of the amazing contributors that we thank so much for being a part of this project. This is a community archive. Like this entire project was inspired by the way Willi Smith worked. He worked within this community of artists and this community of designers and friends, a family, and in order to produce one of probably the most successful brand owned by a Black person in the 20th century, up until, I will say, debatably probably until like FUBU, until like the turn of the 20th century. So, this was really not only just an extension for Willi, but all of the different people who wanted to, I guess, add their own flavor to Willie Smith's aesthetic. And that's something that we really wanted to do within all of these different aspects of the project, particularly the archive, to show that everyone has a very different perspective in their own relationship with Willie Smith. And that story needs to be told instead of having a very fixed, strict idea on a narrative that was created, because I know Alexandra can also attest that this like entire, all the themes took like hard lefts and all complete turns from like start to finish, even at like the very last moment. But it's something that we're extremely proud of and that we do encourage you to see. And moving into that and speaking into that community aspect, we of course want to put on recognition the origins of Willie Smith Day. It was in, I guess, David Dinkins, the mayor of New York, the first African American mayor of New York, but he was the mayor of New York. He appointed Willie Smith Day for February 23rd. I know Willie Smith's birthday is the 29th, but he appointed Willie Smith Day on the 23rd in 1988. And this was a day of two separate things. It was a day of honoring, of course, Willie Smith and having all of these different people, cast of characters who knew Willie, who grew up with Willie, who were in line with Willie or in allegiance with Willie in terms of what they were doing in their own practices and admired him, coming together to celebrate his life, because during Willie Smith, he died of AIDS. A lot of the sources say AIDS-related complications. It was a very new disease at the time, as many people, I'm not sure, I don't want to age anyone on that is viewing this presentation right now, but if you were around the time of in the 80s and 90s, you're fully aware that AIDS was a relatively new was a new phenomenon that really ravished so many industries, particularly the fashion industry. There's so many designers from the industry that died of AIDS because of one thing or another. And don't want to get into that too much, but Willie Smith was certainly a victim of that. And through that lens, this was a moment to also, not in addition to celebrating the life and legacy of Willie and all of the people that he inspired and the entire brand that he built, this was also a moment to bring awareness to this fairly new disease in the sphere of the world that everyone lived in. And this was also used as a fundraiser for AIDS research as well. So money was actually raised. They had like a fashion show, and I'm actually going to skip down. You have Christopher Walken to the right. He was involved in the fun fashion show. And then to the left, you have Tukey and Robert De Niro, who helped put the entire Willie Smith Day festivities every year on in the early part. And then to their flanking them, you have Ashford and Simpson, Mark Ashford and Valerie Simpson, the duo. So there were so many people that really were involved in this Willie Smith Day. Cicely Tyson, rest in peace. She was also involved in Willie Smith Day. Willie and Cicely were two peas in a pod. With that said, this was a moment to, again, celebrate Willie Smith's life, but also bring awareness to AIDS in a way that hadn't really been spotlighted at that time. And to say the least, again, to bring in that narrative of Tukey was very integral in Willie Smith's career and life. And I don't think that should go falling upon ears, because at the end of the day, it is through Tukey's, persistence to make sure that her brother received his just due is what inspired us to continue that work with the exhibition and the archive, and even today, honoring Willie Smith on Willie Smith Day, of course.
Willie Smith Day was really about remembering Willie Smith through activism, and we wanted to draw the parallel to Willie Smith's own efforts during his life to use his platform, his voice, his access to support creative visionaries who were also trying to undermine stereotypes, gender, class, race, and ultimately to promote free expression. during the prime years of Willy Wear, the civil rights gains of the 60s and early 70s were really being pressured by movements towards fiscal and social conservatism. Darnell mentioned a little bit, what was happening at the time of Willi Smith's death in 1987. This was the first year that Ronald Reagan publicly acknowledged the AIDS crisis. So to give a little bit of historical context, but in particular, Willi Smith's collaborations with dancers and choreographers are some of the best examples of how Willi Smith saw his work as a storyteller move beyond the runway. And these collaborations, specifically with Diane McIntyre and also Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane, show how Willi Smith was attempting to support the facilitation of narratives of African American and also queer experience. We realized really early in our research how important Diane McIntyre was to Willi Smith, and also how important dance was to Willi Smith. One of our colleagues, Julie Pastor, spent a great deal amount of time with Diane and even visited her storage in Cleveland, where they dug through her entire archive to unearth the costumes that you see in the image here presented in the exhibition. Willie and Diane met very early in his career through a mutual friend. He tried to get her to model for him. He often asked dancers to walk in his presentations, but Diane was shy and she declined. So he started designing costumes for her compositions. For Salah's Son in 1973, which was right as Willi Smith was transitioning out of digits. And then, of course, the Deep South Suite, which was also performed as part of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater's Duke Ellington Festival in 1976. So the costumes you see first, the first three on the left in the exhibition photo, and then depicted on the right also. And finally, in 1984, he used Willy Wear flight suits and ensembles to costume the dancers in Takeoff from a Forced Landing, which told the story of Diane's mother, who was one of the first female African-American pilots of her time, and had to give up her dream of flying to raise her family. Next slide, please. Another prominent collaboration is Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane Dance Company's production of Secret Pastures, which debuted at the Brooklyn Academy of Music in 1984. Willi Smith created the costumes. Keith Haring designed the set. Peter Gordon created the score. He also created the score for Expedition, which Darnell will talk about in a minute. And Secret Pastures was phenomenal for the time, not just because of the weight of the artistic collaborations. Many of the artists involved were really looking at how to create a connection between avant-garde and the mainstream. But the performance explored politics, economics, race, sexuality. It ignored traditional gender roles on stage, including men dancing with each other. It depicted interracial communities, anti-capitalist values, and the costumes that Willi Smith designed for the performance were also off the rack Willy Wear in most cases. They were unisex, interchangeable, and they really showed his interest in breaking down gender binaries. In particular, his collections were the first to be shown, both men's and women's on the same runway, often with unisex interchangeable clothes. But also just shows how Willi Smith was interested in proving how well Willy Wear garments were designed to move. And here's a short clip of part of the production courtesy of BAM.
It's such a fun it's such a fun show. We had a pleasure of seeing the full in its fullness uh, early on in the during the research phase. But it's such it was so much fun to watch because there were moments in Secret Pastures that were really like fashion moments. And it's also something presented in an expedition where uniquely you see almost a fashion show happening while in the performance, like so like inadvertently, like I don't think that was the intention, but that's what it almost came across as in certain points. And certainly Expedition, there was like plain visual cues to like a fashion show happening. But certainly in that performance, that in Secret Passage, you felt that in some points throughout the entire performance. And then to that point, you mentioned Alexandra about this idea of gender neutrality and unisex, and really kind of defining those, redefining these conventional aspects to these categories of fashion, which were certainly embedded in the fashion industry at that time, and even still today, that we're really kind of breaking up. And that I feel this is another aspect that we kind of take advantage of today in contemporary fashion, that, wearing men wearing women's clothes, women wearing men's clothes, and that whole idea men and women don't really men's wear and women's wear is really kind of leaving our sphere in favor for this world of in between, and it's being celebrated. But during its time, it was certainly advanced. It was avant-garde, and even to that effect, Paris, there were Paris designers that were certainly balked at, that were for creating menswear and showing menswear. And so and for Willie to do that and to separate himself from that world and to say that I'm going to make this bubble on my own and be successful at it is something to be commended. In that vein, here we have with Expedition, and that was to show, it was a film that it was also came in conjunction with the film that he produced in Dakar, Senegal, to show his spring 1986 collection, which entitled, of course, Expedition. There were the influences of this particular collection certainly resides in the West African context. He really wanted to use this moment to publicly show his exploration of his Blackness. And in general, creatives over time, no matter, the field, whether it's fashion, entertainment, and music, and whatnot, artists like to explore their own heritage in various ways, as we all know, and particularly Black ones do it. Black artists and Black creatives like to do that in either subtle and overt ways. And for Willie, it was an evolution because he was doing it in private. And Alexandra, you spoke about this in your introduction text about his artwork and his connection to African art and Black artists, and really kind of integrating that in his private world. But this was an opportunity that he had to continuously show it on a public mainstream. I mean, we think about today with like Beyonce and her Coachella performance and showing HBCU culture at one of the biggest stages in the world. This was you can honestly, I feel like you can talk about this in the same vein, where this was really using a huge platform of film to show his Blackness and to communicate his exploration of it by way of what he was selling. And he did it in a way that wasn't so didactic. He did it in a fun, easy way. A lot of the inspiration of it, specifically, we were looking at the Bogolonfini. In the collection, you'll see a lot of the garments with this specific print on the left-hand side. The print is very much reminiscent of the Bogolonfini or mud cloth textile. It's a dye resist technique that uses mud. And then the negative spaces that are left from the mud are left. How can I communicate this? The negative spaces on the mud are then seen, are peered through amongst like the dark ground that's taken off towards the end of the process, which takes weeks and weeks. But this particular textile technique is very native to the Bamana people, the Dogo people, specifically that live in modern day Mali. The film had a lot of people involved within it. Again, speaking to that artist collaboration aspect, he had Max Paducah produce the film, and Mark Bozek, of course, was very much heavily involved in this production as well. You had Linda Mason, who was involved as the makeup artist, who was Willie's really ace woman, working on many of Willy Wear productions over the course of the span of while Willie was alive, to do the makeup for. So this was certainly not new. And yeah, you had just the cast of character, and Peter Gordon, of course, he was doing the music. It was a silent film, but it had music, but it didn't have a script, more or less. And I think Julie found the main character that, if you watch, we encourage you to go to the site.
On Instagram, which has been such a of connecting to so many people who were involved in Willy Wear projects. I mean, I know that we only have a couple of minutes left, and the majority of the questions in the chat and in the Q&A are related to the most surprising things that we learned during Willi Smith research. And I don't know what your most surprising moment is, Darnell. I know that you had some really exciting moments deep in the McCall's archive, looking at patterns and also connecting with a lot of people who were integral into building the fashion industry, American fashion industry, particularly in the late 60s and early 70s, after, the elation of Battle of Versailles. For me, I was struck by how frequently we came back to Willi Smith when marking these firsts, like the first artist design mass produced t-shirt, something that's so ubiquitous to fashion today. It's like, okay, well, here is the moment where this was first done, and it's Willy Wear. The first time that men's and women's collections were shown on the same runway goes back to Willy Wear. Probably, I would say, the most established version of a collaboration between architects and a fashion brand to create showroom and boutique spaces that connect with the lifestyle ideals of the brand and are not just necessarily creating these luxury boxes for these brands to exist in, but something that was intended to be about becoming and transformation, and was an experience in its own right, and had multi-uses. Maybe just to wrap up, is there anything else that you would add to that list of a surprise that really struck you during your research?
Well, there were so many fun stories that were we were coming full circle around. We talked about Penny Payne. Shout out to Penny Payne from CSS Industries, which owns McCall's and Butterick and Vogue Patterns now. And she's the archivist there and was helping us with our research. And then come to find out, she was one of the models in the Made in New York film. And that Willie did, to show the artist t-shirts and in that whole moment, and to see that, she forgot. But at the end of the day, I feel like moments like that bring you so much joy, to know that people, everyday people that you might be walking next to, had so much contact and was inspired by this man, Willi Smith, and just to bring those stories to life, make it more personal. And I think that's something that I really, really enjoyed about this entire project and bringing it to life. I mean, and even before that, before I came on, I think a big question that I also get is how did this exhibition come to fruition? How did you start this journey? Because there's so many people that don't know about Willi Smith. I mean, I knew about Willi Smith because my mom is from Philadelphia, so she reminds me all the time. So that's not, it was in my world, but I know a lot of people don't know about his story, and also the fact that people like Virgil Abloh are inspired by, you know, Willie Smith and Willy Wear business. Like, but at the same time, there's this disconnect. So I'm sure like everyone out there would love to know your journey in the nascence of this exhibition.
Yeah. I mean, well, I was connected to Willi Smith through sight, through architecture, you know, digging in the archive of site architects and coming across the project and just getting an inkling of, you know, how revelatory of a collaboration, you know, between fashion and architecture in particular existed, you know, in the early 80s, and hearing the story told by James and then Alison Skye, you know, who was also a collaborator of James, founder of Sight, and a big part of that early project. But also, you know, listening to James talk about, you know, the broader influences of Willi Smith and some of the other artists like Diane Kruger and Les Levine, you know, that Willi Smith collaborated with. And this idea of, you know, Willi Smith catalyzing an artistic community that has had such a broad influence on what's happened from that point to today. And it's so obvious, you know, to see Willi Smith mirrored in the careers of fashion designers who are also trying to make a major difference in the industry. And so I just posted here a link to Expedition, which is on the Willi Smith archive. It's definitely a good place to watch the film, but to also dig much deeper into this constellation of perspectives on Willi Smith to understand a little bit more. You know, some of the research that we've conducted, the different archives and participants who have shaped the story. I would encourage anyone who has a story about Willi Smith or Willy Wear to share it with us. We would love to publish it. If you have a picture of yourself as a teenager wearing Willy Wear at an important moment in your life, we especially love those because they really give a sense of, you know, what the clothing meant to people, you know, which I think is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting to hear, but we've heard over and over again. So please, everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. We would love to hear from you when the exhibition opens up again. Please come and join us. But for the meantime, you can view it online.
Right. And are we doing Q&A or do we have time?
Sadly, we've run out of time for today.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Oh, and is there a survey? I know Phoebe mentioned if there's a survey that you all can fill out. I'm not sure if Phoebe, you can send that to everyone while they're still here. Oh, it will. Okay, when they close, perfect. So you all can fill that out. Thank you all so much, as Alexandra said. We really appreciate this and we really appreciate the love. Thank you all so much.
You must read Eric Pritchard's essay also, right? Black and Queer Remembering on Willi Smith Day, which has fed into most of what we know about Willi Smith Day. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining.
Yes, thank y'all. Bye.